Should I put it in the slot?
Yeah, let's put it in that slot.
All right.
You did hear me. It was just ignoring him. Yeah.
No, not intentionally.
Right.
Wait, you just said, I'll put it. Yeah, that's correct.
So what is it?
You're hearing the back feed.
So it was being,
With a very long delay.
so we were being recorded when we didn't know we were being recorded.
I don't know why we're hearing that.
I'd like to get that fixed. That's gonna drive.
Yeah. Think about how it came off.
Good, some.
7-second delay. Believe that was.
We just shut it down and start over. That helps sometimes. Unnerving.
That reality.
It does have something good having to.
Now the audio's off. That makes sense. Okay, is that better?
Echo.
Find out in a few seconds. That's still. I'd say no.
Yeah.
That's like, that stuff's not even shut off.
We have,
Yeah, it seems like if we just mute that TV.
That TV broadcasting that camera have two microphones on the table.
this from this computer, that TV. Hello? Testing 1, 2, 3. That seems good.
Yeah, because nobody's talking.
I may have found the magic combination. No. All right, we're gonna. Okay.
How's this working for council?
Yeah.
There's always a-
Fill out the volunteer day. Yeah,
Busy day, busy days. I
Yeah.
didn't
yeah.
have time.
I just saw your email too late to. record me. If I understood correctly though, you were saying there were a couple of things that the city staff has to do before we can meet. Did I understand that correctly?
Is there significant opposition?
Not much. No work and Jim.
I was talking to.
Finalizing all.
I don't know, some guy.
The website,
Yeah,
the application.
about the Corvallis to the sea trail.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
he bikes,
So are we,
mountain bikes. And
are
they
we in a
do
back in a
it,
situation where
he
we're
said about
broadcasting?
5 hours.
Yeah, we're broadcasting
60 miles.
Yes, we are broadcasting and we are recording now.
Maybe that wasn't the number.
So.
12, maybe it was 12 hours.
John,
It was
John,
like they do it a couple
we're
times a
broadcasting
week,
and recording now.
month.
All right.
It's been a while since I wanted to mention it to you, but then I forgot the details about it.
There are
I don't
on the,
do mountain
I'm
bike.
looking at the
Mountain
YouTube
bike.
right now, and there are words up there.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, then I'll do this. City of Plymouth Planning Commission. Meeting called to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
John Bernardini. Here. Dan Hunsaker.
Here,
Charlie Rose. Here. Peggy Yoder. Here. Joseph Sullivan.
Here.
Haley Green.
Here.
And Gary Connor.
Here.
And Council Liaison Ruth Posey.
Here.
Okay, thank you very much. The first order of business is approval of minutes from August 15th and September 19th. Way back when the temperatures were very different. Does anybody have any comments on August?
I will say that the August 15th minutes, we pulled those at the last meeting because there was some question about some of the motions. We did decide that there was a duplicate of a motion in there, so those should be straightened out.
I'll make a motion to approve the August 15th planning commission meetings minutes.
All in favor?
Aye.
And Haley, did you vote on that?
Haley, was that a yes?
Can you hear me?
Haley, did you vote yes on the minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
September 19th. Questions? Motions?
I'll move that we approve the September 19th for the planning commission minutes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And Haley?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So our next item is application for rezoning. And it is a public hearing. So I have a script to read here. Welcome. And I'll ask Ruth, is there anyone listening online or any discussion, comments or anything? Has anyone signed up to speak?
No, I have not, except that the applicant will have a presentation.
Okay, thank you. We'll get to the right page here, my apologies. The application before us is PC 22-10. And where is the title? No. It's a rezoning application. These are usually a formal title for the application. I'm just confused.
We can state the locations for the record. So,
File number
So
and PC
2210.
that's the name of it, so that should be sufficient.
yeah, but it's a rezoning application for the corner of Chapel Drive and South 19th Streets. So our order of tonight's proceedings will be a staff report and then public testimony, and then commission questions of staff, commission deliberations, and final recommendations. And I don't think we need to have any limit on testimony tonight, but I would request that the applicant make things succinct and try to say things once and stay to the point in the matters that we're considering. And then persons testifying either orally in writing may request a continuance or request the record be held open. These requests should be included in your testimony. And public hearing is now open. Does any commissioner wish to declare any potential or actual conflicts of interest? Does anyone wish to rebut the lack of a conflict of interest? Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds, meaning that the planning commission is not the appropriate body for this hearing? Land use decisions such as this case under consideration this evening are evaluated against the applicable statewide planning goals and guidelines and criteria from the Land Development Code and comprehensive plan as presented in the staff report. Mr. Duffy, can you please now give us the staff report?
So this is a rezoning from a medium density zoning district or classification to a higher density zoning classification. This proposal is encompassing actually 4 lots. We're calling it 19th and Chapel, but it actually encompasses 4 separate lots. Part of a development that we were working through with the applicant for a multifamily project. And they approached us asking that they wanted to increase some of the density. They were paying attention to some of the stuff that we talked about last year as far as our housing needs analysis and what we were discussing as far as the deficit that was shown in our building lands inventory for higher density property, R3 in particular, which was way out of proportion with the other 2 residential districts. And kind of a going trend in today's housing crisis that the entire state is kind of dealing with. So they were looking to up the density on it, or ask for rezoning to allow themselves a little bit more density in the project. So when we're looking at rezoning like this, we don't really tend to look at an individual project. We're looking at whatever can go into that district. But this is this was approached by an applicant, this is not city driven. And it does deal with a project, but because of the parcel is actually not that large in size, the increase in density isn't substantial. So there is some increase in density that they would be allowed. They were allowed to do triplex up to triplexes, fourplexes, but the way their current property was, they didn't really have the lot size to do that. So in this particular rezoning, going up to an R3, they can now propose multifamily, which is a little bit more denser, higher, attached units. You can do, I guess, whatever the development code would allow for density, and the rest of the code requirements such as parking, landscaping, open space and stuff like that. So their density from R2 to R3 increases, but it's not going to be to the extent where it would change the character of the neighborhood. There is some R1 across the street, there's some R3 next to it, but the R3 is single family. But again, that's kind of a denser than normal project as well, and it's Mill Pond Crossing. It doesn't affect the city services. They're adequate to supply either our R2 or R3 zoning densities, transportation. They're both collector streets, so they both have plenty of capacity for entering, and they are going to be entering off a lower traffic count road. They're going to be accessing only from 19th Street and not Chapel. Chapel's a busier drive, obviously. Reviewing it up against transportation impacts, city services, and the recent developments and policies that you guys went through in the comprehensive plan. The city seemed that it all kind of fell into place. The city supports the rezoning. We went through all the citizen involvement activities that we normally do, posting and public hearings and stuff. So, and it is in line with the statewide planning goal for housing, and we believe would be a positive impact for the city to do this. And so this, we're just looking for the planning commission's role is for a recommendation to council, whether it be, and I supplied a motion for you. So our motion is, I think I gave you both motions. You can, as we typically do, yeah. One in support and then one choose to go the other direction. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any preliminary questions of staff before we have the presentation by the applicant?
Thanks, Pat. So as I was reading this, did you actually write this? I mean, is this your words here? Because of the way I read it, it doesn't seem like it's from you. But it's a staff report, so it's got to be from you.
Yeah, yeah, it's for me. It's, some of it is, most of it is new. Some of it was drafted off our last rezoning. That was for Whipple. That was an industrial project, but just had to change more towards the residential. But yeah, it's from me. Why?
Okay. Like I just said it, because as I was reading it, it didn't seem like it was. Okay, but you answered it. Thank you. Let's see. The city has the city adapted the Chapter 3 housing? I know that in August 8th, the city council talked about it, and on the first reading, there were some changes to be made. Has it actually been adopted by the city? Okay.
Ordinance has been drawn up and signed.
Okay. And
We should have copies for everybody for all of the new updated.
I'm
chapters.
waiting until after the urbanization ordinance passes, and then I'll make new copies. The comprehensive plan has been updated on the city's website for chapters 1, 2, and 3. but I really felt it was more efficient to wait until chapter 4 was done to give you new copies.
Could you send us a link or something a while back for the others? Or
And
somebody.
the website is updated with 1, 2, and 3.
So also on the city website, you had talked about the community involvement and such, that it says that when it comes to the comprehensive plan, we'll be collecting comments through surveys and online forms through the process for the comprehensive plan. And the planning commission and city council hosts a number of public hearings to collect citizen input on the policies recommended in the reports. Have we done that?
Yes, yeah,
We've had, this is a public hearing.
this is a public hearing, but we've had public hearings supporting the policies that we're looking at that then support this request for rezoning as well, going from a
So,
lower
and this-
density to a higher density based on our building land inventory and the deficit of R3. So that's.
So we've had surveys and online forms. I guess I don't remember seeing those. Does anybody remember seeing those?
Not any surveys.
I'm just, because our website says that that's what we're doing, or it just seems like that's what we should do.
Maybe you're thinking more specifically to the exact definition of a survey. I mean, we're asking for input. We're always asking for public input, citizen involvement.
Right.
That
Like this-
we're
this public
surveying,
hearing.
we're surveying the general public to say, bring us, give us some, we're not going out, like you would survey to get, what's your favorite, snack or something type of survey. We're reaching out to everybody through public hearings, through, study sessions, through focus groups, through open houses, all of that is considering surveying the general public to gather input.
Not on every individual thing. That's all to do with the comprehensive plan.
Right, it is to do with, but, we're kind of been talking about the comprehensive plan too, right now, right? Like I know last month, we were supposed to start, in the memorandum from last month, it says that we're gonna be focusing on implementing the policies of chapter 3 on housing. And we didn't have that meeting last month.
We're gonna go into that a little after this.
Okay. Okay, and another thing that I just want clear in my mind is that on, talks about in your staff report, it talks about the city has a deficiency of high density zone land. But I know that the housing need analysis states we have 41 acres of high density land that has not been built on. Is that? I'm having a hard time. To me, is 41 acres actually seems like quite a bit. But if we have it says the city has a deficiency of high density zone lands, but the housing needs analysis states that we have 41 acres.
It's deficient in the sense of, it's a large part of it, you're looking at, if you look at the zoning map, you know where it's at.
Right, you can see where it's at.
Right.
Right,
And it's under the ownership of the lumber company, and they have already petitioned us to get rid of it, but
To change the zone.
to change the zoning. But still in relationship to what we have, what is built, part of what that entails is not that entire piece. Part of it is Mill Pond Crossing that's not built yet either. It didn't have a recorded plat on it. So part of the R3 that's available in that we know is going to be developed for Mill Pond. So there is a deficiency. We went through, I think we had plenty of conversations about the amount.
And that's for a 20-year supply.
And the trends are going towards high density residential too.
It is. I know that the trend is to go to high density, but the placement of high density doesn't seem like we really covered that. I know that in last month's, one of the meeting that we didn't have, it says higher density housing in the downtown core, which seems to make sense that it's in the downtown core. It just doesn't seem like we've had a really good conversation about where to put the high density. I know that Mill Pond Crossing, even though there's single family houses on it now, it is zoned R3 and there's going to be high density there. Whether or not that was the best place to put it, that's neither here nor there. But where we put it now, it seems to be, in some of the discussions I've had, that it's closer to downtown seems to be appropriate. So now that I've said that, the 6 places that it's posted, other than it's not in the, this public hearing, it's not in the Philomath News, I'm not sure about that, but where Ruth would know, the 6 places, the post office, the police, the library, City Hall.
It's not easy to come up with 6 public places in a town as small as Philomath, but we
Got a
use
grocery
the
store.
post office, the library, City Hall, the police station, the public works office, and the school district administration office,
Okay,
and the website, and the weekly email.
right, and
And the
the
newsletter.
Gazette Times,
Those are all
yeah.
additionals.
The water bill newsletter probably hits the most people.
We use at times at the time, every public hearing as well.
I think just one more thing that I was thinking of as I was reading this is that on the transportation findings on page 6 of your report, the intensity of the land uses allowed under the proposed high density residential zoning classification would be minimal. I know that this place is going to go on 19th Street. The traffic, the people that live there are going to be coming on 19th, and we're currently looking at 19th Street because of the mess that it is with the schools. I don't know if are we going to be getting that information anytime soon, or do we know? Anybody know?
Of the school,
But
the school
the
survey.
traffic survey that we had on that shows 19th Street is a problem when it comes to dropping off kids, picking up kids going to school.
I thought you had a joint meeting last month or earlier this month.
But nothing that was, at least, I
Nothing
didn't
that
see
was
that
what?
we got a solution, to it, so.
The consultants were taking the information that was gathered from that joint meeting, and they were going back and reworking on the report, was the last I heard. I don't know
Okay,
what
so
the
we probably
timeline
won't
is
get
on the
it very
report.
soon.
And Peggy, just as a note on the map, this map here, the zoning map, that is something that we'll need to be working on this year as well.
The second half of this meeting is the very first step.
Right, which will, that, I was just meaning that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. Could you kind of give a broad overview of what's different between R2 and R3 with regards to lot coverage, allowable uses? Kind of, we could all just read the code, but and just give a broad overview of what the fundamental difference of 2 versus 3.
So primarily, the uses transfer between our R2 and R3. Residential, group homes, a lot of those type of things that you would see in across all 3 residential districts. It really does fall back on density, how much you're allowed. When you go
Lot coverage.
lot coverage, because lot coverage in R1 and R2 are, I believe, maximum 40%. Lot coverage in an R3 is 80%.
Mhm.
So less open space, more density. But again, everything is relevant to the other parts of the code. So if you have more units, you need more parking. Walkable area, depending if they're doing outside trash pickup. So there's a lot more stuff that goes into that.
And if you have that more parking, there's all the landscaping requirements in that parking area.
Yeah, and buffering and stuff like that. So the uses are pretty much the same, except for except for R3, you have more density. R2 stops, I would say, for the most part, at a triplex. They do allow what they call fourplex. I never heard the term fourplex before, but fourplex or townhome or row home you can do, but you'd have to have a certain size parcel to be able to do it. You couldn't create a parcel. You couldn't combine our two parcels to create a large enough parcel to do a fourplex, do a fourplex or row housing, because R2 still falls under a maximum lot size. And that is, like for instance, R1 is maximum lots or minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, maximum of 1.5 times, so 10.5. And R2 is the same way. It has a minimum and a maximum. R3 doesn't. So therefore you can, now you're looking, it has a minimum of 5,000, but it doesn't have the maximum. You don't have to stop it at 150 or 1.5 times. It can be as big as you can assemble lots to make it. And then you go to that next step of easier to put a fourplex or a multifamily. And again, in R3 is the only zoning district that allows multifamily.
Just a comment and a question, following up on your question about the joint meeting of the school board and the city council, where we looked at various traffic issues. The top 4 issues were the areas were 19th and Applegate, 17th and Main. The student pickup at Clemens Primary School on 19th and 19th and Main. So those were the top 4, which I'm sure the consultants will address. My question is, there's a $62,000 figure for infrastructure for a bike path. Can you tell me where that figure came from? Did the city derive that, or the applicant?
So there was I believe it, I don't want to misspeak. I don't know where it came from, but I know there's a plan somewhere. I was going to say trails plan or part of the transportation TSP maybe is where it came from. And I know some funding came from it to create a bicycle ped path along Chapel Road to facilitate some of the residential development basically to school. And I know there's a safe routes to school aspect of it. But part of it was also part of Benton County. It's kind of a joint thing between Benton County doing improvements to Chapel Drive through part of their TSP. And so as development happens along Chapel Drive, the developer of that property has to put in their fair share. So it's derived from the amount of improvements along their stretch of Chapel Drive, along with the city's requirement and the county's requirement. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's split 3 ways. Maybe Peter can answer that, but there is that aspect. So it's derived in some fashion, some formula that this is their share of that frontage and improvement. Some of that is not only just like a bicycle ped path, it's infrastructure, it's taking in stormwater improvements along there and intersection improvements. So.
Okay.
Are you finished? Because that reminded me of a question that I also had about that 62,000. it says that they confirmed that the property, that you have confirmed that the property owner has submitted a check for $62,000. And I was wondering if that was in addition to the $62,000 that was paid to Benton County for road improvements on Chapel Drive.
That is.
It is the six, so it's not coming to Philomath. I mean, it's,
Did I say it was coming from?
well, it just says Public Works has confirmed that the property owners submitted a check for 62 for their obligation to street improvements. So,
It is to the county. It's a county project.
yeah, it's to the county.
So even the cities, I believe, having some share to that as well, but it is a county project. It's a county road. Chapel is.
Yeah,
Well, 19th is up as well.
the information that's provided from the applicant says that it's to Benton County.
So
And if the zoning didn't change, they would still be on the hook for that requirement.
Right.
I just wanted to point it out that if anybody was aware that there was this bike ped path and this project along Chapel Drive, that they paid their fair share. So it was more just morbid acknowledgement.
Back in
Not
20
that any type of, that this has anything to do with them having to pay for 62,000, the development itself, whether it stays R2 or they follow under that or it does.
Because it was originally approved in 2020.
It's been approved, they have their check, yeah. So
Yeah.
they're all in good standing, is basically,
Right.
I think, what I was really trying to express there. They're in good standing.
I'm curious about, will these be homes that are available to be purchased, or will it be rentals, or will it be a mix? Is this the way
It might be worth having the applicant
Yeah.
make their presentation.
that's what I was just about to say. Are there any other
Okay.
questions that we feel are important to ask before the applicant's presentation? Because we'll have lots of opportunity to ask questions.
But
Okay.
I also wanted to reinstate that, that we're not rezoning this to a specific project. We're not rezoning it to this applicant's project or what he's going to do with the density.
Okay.
Meaning that should not influence your decision in doing this. It is just zoned from R2 to R3. It's a higher density, which allows a project that you may do, but it's not, but you are rezoning it to whatever allowed, permitted, or conditional use would be allowed in that R3. Not specifically.
Because anytime that we do anything like this with a rezoning, the applicant can decide they're not going to do their project and then just sit on it or sell it or, but our decision to rezone holds regardless of what they do in the future.
Correct.
Understood.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's see. Is there anything else to say? We'll now move on to public testimony, which is the presentation by the applicant. Can you state your name and
Absolutely. Would you guys mind if I pull up the little
Please do.
table and
please?
I have my notes on my laptop, and so it would be a little less awkward than if I stand here with the laptop.
Yeah.
You can also sit here if you prefer.
For terminology clarifications, he's not technically an applicant, he's a public member of the public that is testifying as to whether or not this is a zone change should be authorized by the planning commission, because there is no project or permit going on, and there's no specific permit that we're looking at. So it's not it's my presentation so much as it's public testimony related to the comment about this is a rezone for any potential use of a higher density residential.
Okay. But it's still a proposal from,
Right, but for terminology purposes,
okay. It just says zone change application.
I know.
I get read about things like that. All right, thank you. Please proceed.
Good evening. My name is Peter Cedars. I'm with MSS Engineering, a local engineering firm in Corvallis. And my address for the record is 215 Northwest 4th Street, Corvallis, Oregon 97330. Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to bring my presentation for you. I can distribute it, or you can distribute it however you like.
And this is different than what's in our packet.
That is different than what's in your packet, yeah.
And Ruth, do you have an electronic copy of this or?
Pat was gracious enough to make extra copies. I didn't know if I was going to be presenting electronically or paper, and so I was glad I brought some paper, but didn't know how many copies to make.
Oh, you have one.
Yeah, everybody's got one.
Do we have an electronic copy so that the
We-
city?
Yeah, I can provide an electronic copy. I have it here. I should,
Just, you can send it to me.
yeah, I'll just email it to. As I walk through this, I'll just tell you when I'm moving from page to page. Again, this is presentation in support of the zone change that is proposed, and projects located on the, you can go to the second page there, just give you a quick overview of the existing conditions, in case any of you are not familiar with the property. It's located at the northwest corner of 19th and Chapel. The property is currently zoned R2, as was mentioned, and just over an acre in size. I believe it's 1.09 acres. Has frontage on both Chapel and 19th there. Maybe just before I forget, to address some of the questions that came out earlier. As Pat mentioned, we've been working on this development, this property to develop it for some time. And in the previous applications, we applied for 2 different partitions on this piece of property, which were approved. As part of the conditions of approval for those, the developer was required to provide frontage improvements both on 19th and on Chapel Drive. It's, as you probably are aware, one of those unique areas where the city owns the frontage along 19th Street and the county owns the frontage along Chapel. So we, because the county was in the process of designing and planning for a improvement at the intersection there, rather than us constructing those improvements as part of the development that we were working on, it made more sense for us to just pay towards the completion of the improvements that are along Chapel for the portion that we were required to do as part of that partition. So that included essentially a half-street improvement, including the pedestrian bike path that runs there along Chapel. And so that $62,000 was the estimated construction cost to contribute for our frontage. All of the improvements that were required there along Chapel. In addition to that, there's also improvements that were required on 19th. Most of that is already developed. However, there was still some additional modifications that were required on there for the driveway approaches and the utility connections and that sorts of thing. So there's also a bond that was provided to the city of Philomath for the construction of those improvements. Those have not been completed yet because they'll be done in conjunction with the actual development of the property. Those are all fully paid for and secured, so that, as Pat mentioned, all of the required improvements for this property are already in place with previous applications have been submitted. Overall, the property is bounded by an R3 zone immediately to the west of this. The property immediately north of it is still in the county and it's zoned medium density residential. And to the east across 19th Street is R1 zoning and EFU land on the other side of the city limits there to the south. I'm going to just try to hit the highlights of the zone change decision criteria that we believe are applicable in here, and I will do my best to not restate anything that Pat has already so gone over and done a nice job of talking about in his staff report. but the elements that we believe are applicable to this decision are, number one, demonstrating that the proposed zoning is more appropriate than the current zoning. Adverse impact would be minimal on adjacent land. The city can provide services and as a result of the amendment, and then that it has conformance with the plan policies, which the ones that we identified as applicable being citizen involvement, housing, and plan implementation. Next page there. So as far as demonstrating the proposed zoning is more appropriate than the current one, I think the housing needs analysis is probably the most important element there to highlight, and you guys already had a bit of discussion on that. There's a need for a diverse mix of housing types. The obviously affordability is an important issue, and the need to increase the housing stock is a factor in being able to reduce the cost of housing overall. Economic conditions can make single family dwellings unaffordable for many residents, and there's currently, as I understand it, less than 1% of the residentially zoned land is available for high density residential housing. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next page here. I talked a little bit already about the kind of the adjacent zoning, so I won't go over that again. But there is, 19th Street does provide a buffer to the R1 zone that is the lowest density zone adjacent. The R3 zone, we are contiguous to the R3 zone, which makes this appropriate in terms of the zoning relative to the other zones around it, as well as the R2, which is allows up to triplexes. This would just allow the same housing type except slightly more density and including multifamily. And there are requirements for buffers such as street trees and setbacks that help to mitigate impacts. On the next page, you'll see kind of just an overview of the zoning map. Primarily the reason we included this graphic is just to identify, in terms of the way that our zoning, the R3 zoning is distributed. It's not uncommon or atypical in the way that the zonings currently are done, that R3 may buffer up against R1 or R2 zoning. So I think this fits overall in terms of those adjacent zonings. The code obviously indicates that the R3 zoning should be placed along major collectors and arterials, which this property is. So we can go to the next slide. There was a site design review that was previously proposed for this project. It was case file P2217, and you can kind of see the site plan of what that looked like. It isn't particularly relevant to this decision, but the overall, the developer's intent is that the overall footprint of that project would be pretty similar in terms of the land use and site layout. We did have a pre-application meeting with the city and haven't had any concerns raised by staff of the proposed zone change. All right, you can go to the next one there. As far as conformance with plan policies, I don't think I need to spend much time on the citizen involvement piece that was discussed already, and clearly the notices and the hearings are, I believe, demonstrate conformance with that. The next section, in terms of conformance with the housing policy, the Philomath housing needs analysis states that there is sufficient land to accommodate housing development in each of its plan designations. The relative unaffordability of that housing stock creates a significant unmet housing need. And I quote here, the rent at newly built multifamily housing ranges from about $1,300 to $1,500 per month. And about 40% of Philomath's households are unable to afford this rent cost. A small portion of this unmet housing need can be met through the development of income-restricted affordable housing. Philomath will have unmet renter housing needs, both for existing households and for new households. And that comes from page 76 of the housing needs analysis that was just completed last year. Providing additional R3 zoning provides the flexibility for developing middle housing, which is typically referred to as small single-family detached housing, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes, along with multifamily housing units of 5 units or more. Increasing the supply of these units in the community can cause the existing units to provide more competitive prices to reduce vacancies. Something to note here is that while this report was written in 2021 during the recent housing boom, where interest rates were still low and new homes were being built at a rapid pace, with current interest rates and uncertainty with inflation, it's likely that even fewer households will be able to afford detached single-family dwellings and be looking into multifamily options. I would also just point out that with the increase in inflationary costs in construction, as well as interest rates, that also puts a damper on potential for development, as it makes it more difficult for developers to be able to make projects economically feasible. So I would say opportunities to increase the housing availability, if that's something that's important, should be encouraged. The next page, in terms of housing, we identified policy 1.3, which encouraged development of small vacant and partially vacant parcels, with policies that support the development of infill housing types in areas with existing urban service. Clearly, this site has the services. It's an infill lot, meets those type of definitions. So certainly fits that housing policy. On the next page, we identified policy 2.2 and 3.5. Policy 2.2, which encourages a wide range of housing development types to meet the housing needs of all income levels in both existing neighborhoods and new residential areas by removing or lowering barriers to residential development. And 3.5, which is supporting diverse mix of housing types. Predominant housing type in the area around the subject property is single-family detached homes. Changing the zoning to R3 increases the housing development types by allowing fourplex and multifamily development dwelling options, in addition to duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes. According to the housing needs analysis, quote, if the city adopts policies to increase opportunities to build smaller scale single-family and multifamily housing types, particularly multifamily housing that is affordable to lower and higher income households, a larger percentage of new housing developed over the next 20 years in Philomath may begin to address the city's needs. First-time home buyers and families often can no longer afford to pay median home sale prices in Philomath. Older adults looking to downsize after retirement to cut costs and reduce house and property maintenance. The R3 zone supports housing types for the widest range of Philomath residents. And that earlier quote comes from page 58 of the housing needs analysis. We'll move on to the next slide there, or the next page. Plan implementation is fairly straightforward. Simply that the zone or the zone change requires a comprehensive plan amendment, and the amendment is required to fit within the zones that are allowed. We're proposing to move from medium to high density, so not too much to dwell on there. I will also just point out that the proposal is in conformance with 8 statewide planning goals, specifically goals 1, 2, 10, and 12. And Philomath has met goal 2 already by the virtue of your implementation of the comprehensive plan. You have the housing needs analysis, so there's conformance there in terms of following the process that's outlined. And transportation impact assessment dated October 7, 2022 is included with zone change application and discusses the potential traffic impacts of changing the zoning from R2 to R3. I do want to just point out that the intersection there at 19th and Chapel, based on the transportation system plan that the city of Philomath has identified, that intersection is having a level of service B, which is they're generally graded from A through D, A being the highest and D the lowest. D is generally considered an acceptable level of service. And so that intersection there, based on the city's transportation plan, has a very high level of service. The project that's being proposed adds a very insignificant amount of traffic to 19th Street compared to the available capacity there. And so based on that, the potential changes in traffic really are not deemed to be significant, and therefore meets the goal 12 of the Oregon statewide planning goal and shouldn't require any further action. With that, I'll conclude my presentation and leave it open for any questions you may have.
Does anyone have any questions?
Well, no, I'll ask
Mr. Seavers.
ask one question. I was just curious if you were to build this, would the homes be marketed for purchase, or would it be mostly rentals?
Well, again, I would agree with Pat that there is a proposal that we're working on. I can tell you that with any plan until it's built, it's it is tentative, just based on economic conditions and the where things are at any given time. So the intent of the developer is to build multifamily units that would be for rent. That is the current proposal, but there's no guarantee that would be what actually gets built, depending on what happens with the market.
Okay, but that's the intent.
That's the intent, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so is MSS, do you guys own this property or are you consulting for the owner?
We're consulting for the owner.
Who's the owner?
It is Spees Real Estate. I actually don't know the entity exactly off the top of my head, but
It's listed in the Benton County tax law. The county records is 800 property LLC and like 900 property LLC, but I mean, honestly, I have no idea who that is. Do you know if there's some people around here, or is it
yeah, it's a local developer.
okay? And what's the name of the developer or the owner or whatever?
The developer's name is Paul Spees.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks.
In the application, it says he's the registered agent for that LLC.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
I must have missed that.
It's buried. It's in there.
And do you know what Mr. Speed's plan is? Is he rezoning and selling it or just?
No, I believe he intends to develop it.
Mhm.
But this, like you had said, we're talking about rezoning it, which could actually be 24 units would be allowed on that piece on an R3.
It's just nice to know sometimes.
Yeah, but things, look at Mill Pond. It was an R3, but it was sworn up and down that it was gonna be single family houses, but it's not.
Mhm.
So things do change.
But they have put the $62,000 down. They have already come to this body and made the I guess it was lot line adjustments to it. So they've been working on it.
So I'm also just gonna interrupt because it's time for questions of deliberation. If we just ask questions of the current person testifying.
Okay, thank you.
So was it MSS who removed the trees that were on the property?
No, I don't know, I wasn't aware of who removed the trees. I assume it's probably the developer, but I'm not certain. That'd be my assumption. though.
Big, beautiful trees, like I think what John has tried.
Does anyone else have any questions for the?
Yeah, I do.
Mr. Speed?
On the zone change report, that it says this piece of property qualifies as infill, and I was wondering by whom determines that this piece of property is qualified as infill.
Well, maybe Pat knows the definition of infill better than I do, but generally, infill development is property that is, where you're expanding road networks. The opposite of an infill development is typically a development where you're having to expand road and utility networks in order to serve the property. This property is surrounded by existing right-of-way and utilities, which is typically what's characteristic of infill type development. So I'm not sure if I didn't look up the definition of infill.
That's it. That's how I explain it.
And it's technically real.
It's in the city.
Are there any other questions?
Since I'm a little bit confused, since we're just talking about a rezoning that there's a lot of work here talking about what it's going to be when we're not supposed to really be paying attention to that, right? Because we're talking about a zone change, we're not talking about an individual, the developer says they're gonna do this, but they could do this, especially when it talks about, or affordability, that kind of tugs at our heartstrings to think, well, we want people to be able to find a place that's cheaper to live, but that might not be what happens.
Right.
Things could change. In order to keep rentals probably lower, you have to actually work with somebody that's going to help keep the rent lower, or else it's just going to be market driven, I'm assuming. So I just think that,
Commissioner Yoder.
oh, I'm sorry.
Question.
Thank you. I'm done. Yeah, thank you. I'm done.
Okay, I'd be happy to respond if that's okay.
What was your question?
My question is, this report that you spent a lot of time and effort putting into, we are actually to disregard a lot of that. Is that correct? Because we're voting on a zone change, not.
I'm not sure we should be asking.
That's a question.
No, but it's not for him to answer. It's, we're the body. We don't ask the non-applicant. What our process is.
Well, he's an applicant, he's just not making a presentation. He's testifying.
Okay.
You don't have to answer that.
Well, what I would say is the report is written to show the impact of development on the property. And to show that we are fitting with the overall decision criteria. So while the report is written indicating what can be developed there, it doesn't mean it's what's going to be developed there. But the purpose of the reports that we put together was to demonstrate that there is utility services, that there is adequate traffic service that's not going to create a negative impact on the road or the intersection, those sorts of things. So that's really the purpose of, yeah, we did spend a lot of time showing what could go there, and the purpose is for them, for having some basis to evaluate those decision criteria. Certainly, you know, what I think what you base the decision on is all spelled out in the code. So I don't need to comment on that. I think in terms of the question that was implied regarding affordability, the project, you know, is, we're not making a claim or a statement that this is going to be quote unquote affordable housing or rent controlled housing. The argument that we're making in terms of affordability is that market forces with supply and demand will dictate prices based on supply. So having available supply necessarily, maybe it's not necessarily, but creates better conditions for more affordability. So if there are, you know, twice as many units available as there are renters that are looking for units, obviously, in order to get as many units rented as possible, landowners are going to then adjust their prices to try to increase their occupancy on the units. So the affordability statements that we're making are not based around affordable housing as, you know, per se, as much as creating more housing, which provides the opportunity for better affordability. Does that state as succinctly as possible? But that's essentially what we're trying to point out. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cedars.
Yeah.
For your testimony.
I'll stick around if there's further questions.
So there was no request to hold the record open or for a continuance. And the planning commission will continue deliberation after the close of this public hearing.
I believe you do need to ask if there's anyone,
Okay.
any other testifiers.
Is anyone else here to testify to this public hearing regarding this application for zoning change?
Or online.
Or online?
Just for the record.
Okay. Hearing none. The public hearing is closed. The next step is we can ask additional questions of staff, but I would like to propose a 5-minute recess. We're going to have a 5-minute recess.
Okay.
Did you stop the recording? Thank you.
For disclaimer, do not talk. Sorry.
Usually they don't.
Yeah.
It just clouds everything.
Well, and you know, the
Okay, convening now on our public hearing regarding this rezoning application. Are there any questions of staff at this time regarding testimony or the application before we start deliberating? We can ask questions during deliberation. So I guess with that, we'll move on to deliberation. And I would encourage everybody to kind of speak your mind. I don't think we need to talk in circles around all this. I think it's very interesting that this application comes to us tonight, right when we're about to start this conversation on a grand scale, because it's weighing the many different objectives of our comprehensive plan. As always, you know, we want affordable housing, which often means higher density. We want to maintain open space in a small town feel, you know, landscaping and all that kind of thing. Higher lot coverage is kind of contrary to some of the things we like, but it's also some of the objectives. So I certainly have all kinds of mixed feelings about any application, but I would like to hear people's perspectives.
Well, I guess I'll start. I think it's, I mean, in a sense, it's small and like in a sense, a drop in the bucket. I do think in the sense where it's at, I think it's a good place to be. I think it's near the schools, a walking distance, that sort of thing. I think for the transportation, it's a good fit because of the walking distance and where I think what would become of it as far as of a project, the city would push them to have an exit or the entrance exit farther north from the intersection, you know, on the north side of the property. There would be that bike path thing that was talked about with the county. That sounds great. So along the chapel, that would be great. I think the issue, and I think it probably should be a conversation. Thanks, Peggy, for talking about that. I think we'll find that I think what he was talking about, I mean, I think to be realistic in terms of market driven, I think we have to be realistic about that. Unless there is, we find get some subsidized, yeah, thank you, developments, we're not going to get what we really want in terms of something really low in terms of rents. I mean, I'm not saying we want that with all of them, but when there was that discussion, on this Boulevard Apartments, that was too late. But there is those sorts of situations that you can go to the state, or the developer could go to the state and get that up front. And that's something that we have to work, with the developer to get up front, because they're not going to be able to come in and just by their heart, produce that, give rents for $600 a month or whatever it might be and make money at it. They're just not going to be able to do that. So when we want to do that, I mean, that's something that we're going to have to be proactive about doing as a city, to find those. I mean, I don't even know who that company was, but we need to be proactive about doing that. And I do believe, as the gentleman said, the more that you have of it, if it's multifamily dwellings, that will help bring the prices down incrementally, but it isn't gonna just, I mean, like I say, this is just small potatoes. I mean, you're gonna have to have more of it, and eventually it'll help bring prices down. But I think to get something really, to make a big difference, it's gonna have to be, government supported. And so that, and I'm in favor of making this change, of course. That's my experience.
I really like what you said, that makes a lot of sense.
Commissioner Yoder, you're raising your pencil or raising your hand? All right, thanks.
I usually don't, thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to just remind us that the information that we were going to be going over last month before it was canceled.
Postpone. Till today.
Postponed. Well, we're not talking about what we were gonna talk about last month, let's put it that way. We weren't gonna talk about this last month, we were gonna talk about.
That's the second half of the meeting. Tonight.
Okay, so let me just talk, okay? It says the next step, this is from Patrick. The next step in the process is to develop a strategy to address the goals and objectives, to make the necessary amendments by developing new code language and adjusting the zoning comprehensive plan map accordingly. And that's what we'll be doing for the next few months. I feel that this would, us saying that it's just a drop of the bucket, drop of the bucket is, small potatoes, is beside the point. I think that we should be going over the comprehensive plan and the zoning map ourselves without being, it shouldn't be influenced by a developer. They've already been approved, granted, as an R2, but it has already been approved. It's not as if we're saying, well, you're not going to be able to build anything there. They bought the property knowing that it was an R2. So let us do what we were going to be doing and discussing the zoning and where we're going to be putting R3. I agree we need some more R3, but maybe we just don't need it continually putting on the outskirts of our city limits. Maybe we need to focus on putting the R3 closer into town, and not just piecemeal where the R3, continue to piecemeal where the R3 is going to be. I'm done for right this second.
So I'm just gonna comment on that, just because of the timing of when we're gonna look at what the comp plan is to make amendments and when this application was submitted. Given what, the criteria of the comprehensive plan is currently, that's what we should be looking at. So in terms of how might we change this in the future and how will this impact that, that shouldn't be something that's considered at this particular deliberation session.
So I have a comment about it. I think one thing in favor of it is that as I think about the city and the structure of the city, some of the things that talk about mixed use development and why this is definitely not like a total full on mixed use development. I think it's a bad thing if all of our R3 zoning is like shoved off in one corner in a 40-acre lot with a whole bunch of apartment buildings. And I think having that, there's some language in the housing needs analysis and in our comp plan about having a mix of levels in any given area. And I think even though Mill Pond is R3, it's not apartment buildings, whereas this is essentially could be a small patch of apartment buildings. And I think a few small patches of apartment buildings close to schools, close to this, and interspersed throughout town is better than just putting it all off in some large undeveloped tracts. So I think that's one of the pros in my mind. And I can think of cons too. As we're saying with regards to where we're going to be going and looking at the big map. I think it's the kind of thing that I would be considering, looking at where can we have little infill pieces of R3 as opposed to where's our R3 subdivision.
I also just want to point out, we're not looking just at multifamily residential and an R3 use. And so as the commission should also be considering, regardless of whether the developer came, would this change benefit the community for any allowed outright or conditional allowed use in the R2 zone? So again, just related to this isn't the reason it's not an applicant in terms of he's an applicant that's initiated this, he's not an applicant that's asking for a permit. So testimony, he's just one member of the public that happened to show up.
Yeah, so I pretty much agree with everything that I've heard so far. Peggy, I've been thinking a lot of the same thoughts that you have. In the sense that in an ideal world, we would have already had the discussion about land use, and we would have, taken a big paintbrush and painted an ideal city of Philomath and where all the zoning goes and have a unified plan. And in that ideal world, applications like this would be very much the rarity because we would already plan for where we're going to put high density residential and low density residential and all this kind of stuff. Having said that, though, we haven't gotten there, whether it's, bad luck or good luck or somebody's fault, or it just happened that way. It just didn't work out. It didn't happen. And so where we're at right now is we've got an applicant who's asking to do something right now. They're entitled to do. And right now, our land use isn't in any particular order. We've got huge swaths of industrial land left over from when everyone was hoping for a sawmill coming back. And we haven't really repurposed it or come up with a unified plan. That's why we've got apartments sitting way the heck out of town on the east side, because there's a big chunk of land no one was using. And they said, well, you guys need more high density. How about we put it here? And nobody can, on the spur of the moment, think of a good reason why not. So then, boom, we have apartments right there, which is, probably in retrospect, not a great thing, but it happens. So we're at the tail end of this long period where we kind of have a mess as far as zoning goes. And, whether it was in their favor or not, they chose to make this application right now. And so we kind of have to consider it on that merit. So to me, if this application came in 6 months from now, I'd probably say, sorry, you're out of luck. We made a great plan, good plan, put your apartments somewhere where there's already R3. That's probably what I would say. Coming right now, knowing that we don't really have a great plan for where R3 goes, whether it all goes in the center, or if we mix and match with R2, I feel like we have to just kind of take it on its merits and maybe give it the benefit of the doubt. Having said that, when we look at the criteria, and specifically to me, the one that I think about the most is whether it would be better off under the new proposed zoning, better off in R3. And I think, well, it isn't a road with good access, and it's close to the school, and it's kind of mixed in part of town. We already have lots and lots of development going on. South end of town, there's already equipment working and houses going up and people talking and stuff. And it's next to that big piece of R3. It honestly seems pretty appropriate. Now, I would rather we just could say, pause this whole discussion, call us up in 6 months. Unfortunately, that's not really our luxury. If we could do that, I don't know if we would like this location or not, but having to make a decision now with the facts we have, me personally, it seems reasonable. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because, I have been thinking kind of the same thoughts you are. I wish we could do this in a different order. But for what it is, I don't see any reason why these, few acres, we couldn't drive by and see an apartment there and regret our decision. It seems like it's within the bounds of the requirements that we're being asked to fulfill. And it's also fairly reasonable and generally speaking, good for Philomath.
If I'm wrong, anybody, is tabling for 6 months is an option as we review our zoning.
I believe we would have to deny it on the merits now. We say, sorry, that just doesn't conform. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And then if we had all these discussions and said, oh, we're going to rezone it, we would have to right now find it not meeting the criteria.
Do we have a book right here that we could just read off those allowed in conditional uses for R3? Just to refresh everybody's mind, what's in play other than just residential.
I have
I
it.
think he, yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
think he
Great.
supplied it too.
So uses that are allowed outright are all R4 allowed uses, multifamily dwelling, residential care home, residential care facility, church, nonprofit, religious or philanthropic institution, daycare facility, nursery school, day nursery, kindergarten, or similar activity, and manufacturing home park. So those are the ones that are allowed outright, don't need a conditional use permit. And then for conditional uses, it's all of the R2 conditional uses unless it's been specifically allowed outright. So that would be fourplex, neighborhood, commercial, bed and breakfast. And then all of the it would be all of the R1 conditional uses as well. Unless allowed outright.
It'd be good if it became a mobile home park.
Can't have too many mobile home parks.
And because it's legislative, I suppose it's not subject to 180-day rule, correct? Yeah, so I suppose, right, if you decided that this isn't a good time to make a legislative change, you can also put it off because part of the legislative thing is that you table it for later discussion. That is definitely possible. It's just making sure that you have, like, you make that statement, make sure that it's tabled and that you don't, in theory, because it's legislative, you don't have to ever make a decision on this. You can just have it sit in front of you forever, but that might not necessarily be in Paloma's best interests at the same time. So
There's certain rules too, and I'm not sure if the rule, usually you table something, you have to have it to a specific date. You could say 6 months because you're going through a process.
right,
But
and
you can't just be forever.
right, I mean, for purposes of deliberations, plus after that point in time, it might make more sense to have a new public hearing to allow for new testimony as things change. So, I mean, it's weighing all of those issues, because as the longer we put it out, the more likely someone is to talk to you about it and all of that. And when we come back for deliberations, we still need to make ex parte conduct disclosures and make sure that none of those requirements have been breached or muddied or anything like that. So you are just making a recommendation to council. That recommendation to council could be, you should deny this until we go and redo the zoning changes. But putting it down in council's hands, and as the planning commission saying, as this is our expertise, this is what we recommend. And then council would have another hearing about this as well, to have those kind of statements. And you can, as the planning commission, you'd be making the official statement, we feel X, therefore you should do Y. Does that sound about right then?
So Gary, reasonable question. Why is this on the agenda tonight versus, like, hypothetically, we could have spent the whole meeting talking about zoning changes and just put this on the agenda for January, February. Do you know if there's a reason?
No, but I imagine that we have an obligation to hear something within a certain amount of time once the application comes in.
Well, again, there's
Staff
that-
can't just choose to receive the application here 2 years later. Right?
Right, yeah, it's legislative, there's not the 180-day rule, but just as a rule, they submit an application, we process it. We're not gonna ask ourselves, we're not asking the question that you're asking. I concur with some of what you're saying, but some of it I don't, but again, it's an applicant that's asking for a decision, and we set a public hearing.
Okay, so you guys generally tend to prioritize those over the other work of the commission or whatever?
Well, we don't know how long the discussion of housing and commercial and rezoning and swapping zoning districts and overlay districts. Is it gonna take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? We've stripped some stuff out for quite a ways.
Yeah, if we wait till the whole comprehensive plan is updated, people have to sit on their hands for 18 months.
I wouldn't want them to make a decision like that. It's not their job.
Agreed. That's what I was going to say is our job tonight is to make a recommendation to city council, and city council is going to decide what to do with it. Because even if we decide to do nothing, does it still go to city council, or are we a firewall?
You could recommend, so you could recommend approval, you could recommend denial, come up with some criteria that supports a denial, you could actually, recommend tabling but you have to come up with specific reasons for that, and that being what Joe was saying.
But if we tabled it, would it sit with us or would it go to city council to decide whether?
No, you'd be recommending,
We'd be
It's still
recommending.
you're
to city council.
recommending.
So regardless of what we say, it is going to city council.
Yeah.
And then what would likely happen now that I'm actually thinking about this is that if city council were to table it, it doesn't, unless they bring it back on the table and remand it back to the planning commission, it sits with city council.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bernadine?
I agree with what both of you said, and I would like to combine them. I think this is a great place for R3. I am in favor of higher density in general, and I'm in favor of mixing the zoning throughout the city more than is currently practiced. I generally think that's a benefit to a community. So I am in favor of that. I also feel like if we just continue to allow development at market value, we will never have affordable housing in a community this size unless we actively pursue whatever process needs to happen to make sure that we actually have government subsidized housing or some such thing, which I really, really hope that we do. And this particular area seems like a great place for that, like you say, close to schools. If just say this were an apartment complex, which I think it might possibly be with rental units, that would be a fantastic place for some folks who can't otherwise afford to live here. I don't know. I would be delighted if we had some truly low income housing in an apartment complex in that spot, is what I'm saying.
But that's not what's being proposed for this spot, unless, I guess.
No, it could be a mobile home park.
Or it could be super high end.
Or it could be super high end.
condos, the townhouse, whatever.
It's true, but it's also a tiny little spot. And so regardless, I don't think it's big enough. I'm not gonna lose too much sleep over this because it's small enough that however bad it gets, it's not like Mill Pond, it's not something that's gonna significantly alter the character of the city, whatever it is. I think it's small enough that I'm happy to be like, yeah, go.
Yeah, I like that it's a good infill project that, is in front of us now. I mean, we need housing now also, and we put it off so that we can get some subsidized housing. How long is that going to take? I recognize that we need that, but I like that this is here and now and could provide some new homes.
Maybe we should go to Mill Pond about that subsidized thing. Where they're struggling with all the things that they are. They hadn't thought about that even before.
They are working, I just see something without going into too much more
Let's-
detail.
Oh, yeah, no,
Let's
no,
keep that.
sorry about that.
No worries.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
But I think, yeah, you're right. I think I can speak on this though, as far as to a lot of the points that have been brought up, best planning practices. And I think Peter defined infill correctly, and that could apply in a lot of other areas of the city, but you don't want to do infill or change zoning, say up 11th or 12th Street, North 11th or 12th Street, and say, we want to drop some R3 in here and do some higher density. Because best planning practices that you see is usually you will have the higher density developments on the outside, not on the inside, not deeper into like a residential zone or a residential grid, whereas you have you have renters, for instance, and multifamily districts driving through owner occupied subdivisions and neighborhoods. You want it the opposite. You want to have the higher density on the outside where they can, because they still have to access transportation routes, but you know, they may not have, they may not have 2 or 3 cars, so they're looking to catch public transportation or something. But either way, you
Walk to
don't.
school.
Huh?
Or walk to school.
Or walk, but you don't want, you want to have the higher density on the outside, you don't want to have higher density behind lower density, single family houses. So everybody that's renting in these apartments back here is going through your neighborhood. So it's just best, kind of the best practices. So having this on the outside, on 2 collector roads, I think is the appropriate spot for it. I think it's been said in a couple of different ways, but I think it is.
It's a good candidate for R3 is in normal planning approaches.
I also think that completing that bike ped path that is required of Mill Pond is a really important factor here too. And that bike path, people that live in the apartments could just ride their bikes right into town, for whatever purpose. It seems really well connected to me.
But even that isn't hinging on whether a zone change.
No, that's true. Just supporting kind of what's about this.
There's a lot of abstract stuff here that we talked about that doesn't apply because we just don't know. There's too many unknowns. So that's why it's really important to stick to the criteria, like statewide planning goals. And that's really what's in front of you, not what could or could not be done.
I think the things that are top on my mind are rewriting some of our allowed and conditional uses in our R3 zones.
Well,
But that's not now.
just for a last comment that all of us heard. I don't feel anything different, but I do think that of the efforts that SPEs have put into what they've already done, like I said earlier, I think that they really want to move forward with developing this property. And the fact that they wanted to go to a higher density means that they do want to put in the multifamily, which is something that we do want to have here. I do believe that it is a good fit because of the transportation and because of it's next to the other R3 and it's by the schools. We don't know what's going to happen when we get into making these changes that we're talking about. It may be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might, how we work, it might take us 9 months, and to make them sit and wait for us to do that, I don't think that's appropriate for us to even think about doing. Or maybe it's okay for us to think about it, but I think then we need to decide that we need to give some finality to them. And I believe that means that we need to decide tonight to move forward with them, making the change to the R3. I don't.
Sounded like a motion that we could.
Well, then I was going to
Continue
make that
deliberating.
motion.
Okay.
And I move that the findings as presented in the staff report, file number PC 22-10, dated November 15th, 2022, be adopted. And the planning commission recommend an approval to the city council to amend the comprehensive plan map from medium density residential to high density residential and the zoning map from R2 to R3.
Okay, any discussion? Any more discussion?
Is she here? I haven't.
Oh,
I always
Yeah.
forget about her. She has a second.
I'm blanking. Commissioner, I'll get your last name here in a second.
Green.
Green, Commissioner Green, do you have any commentary? Are you still there? I guess is a good question. Have you heard everything that's gone on?
I'm here. No commentary. I'm good.
Great, thank you. Well, I guess if there is no further comment, we should have a vote. All in favor of the motion as discussed to change the zoning on the slot from R2 to R3. All in favor, say aye.
All right,
Opposed? And Commissioner Green, was your vote for or against?
Come on, Haley.
Haley?
Perfect system.
Haley, did you vote yes or no?
Haley,
We marker as no vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just marker against one.
Okay,
You have a hundred.
yes, that's my side. So it passed 5-1-1.
511.
No,
What?
you were voted for.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 5-1. So that recommendation's been made to the city council. And because the planning commission's recommendation is not a decision, it cannot be appealed. The planning commission's recommendation will be considered by the city council in a subsequently noticed public hearing.
I'll be right back.
I guess we'll take a very brief recess.
You should pass on to Mr. Spies that it would seem a lot less mysterious if he were able to attend in person.
Oh.
You guys did a good job of that first.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
You're back.
Sorry, I'll had ex parte whether.
Man, are you using on your mic?
And I have another meeting.
periodically.
Yeah. Like, I can imagine it's a beautiful, beautiful route, especially once you get past Harlan, you get up in the hills there, just there's nobody and nothing around.
Ready to read, still recording.
If we can start a little slowly, and maybe give John a chance to get back before she misses much. So why don't you go ahead and start your preamble?
So, thanks to Peggy to get me started on this about an hour and a half ago. No, there was a lot of crossover to it, and I understand how, bringing some of the conversation, how it went that way, you know, so. And what we really wanted to do is we talked about this, and obviously this is the next step, once you create your, you know, went through the process of getting the background or the foundation information to create new policy, and we went discussed and created and approved new policies. And the next step after that is to implement some of those. Some of those, you know, not all policies need to be implemented. Some are generic, some are talking about specifics, some talk about melding things across different zoning districts, because we've talked about mixed use development and putting commercial into residential or non-residential into commercial. So some of these things are going to be important to kind of get across. Really, I don't think we need to really go into a lot of detail right now, but one of the things on the second page is we would like to hear a little bit of input from the planning commission given to staff, which is planning department, Ruth, myself, and Chris, on kind of a work implementation plan. Where do we get started? What would be a good way to, what would you like to address first? Is it housing? We have the economic opportunities analysis. And it talks about lack or deficiencies in commercial districts, and which could translate into mixed use. And then there's a lot of discussion in the housing, I think even more than even that. So we're kind of looking for a prioritization, something, and again, it doesn't even have to come up with the thing. Maybe it's something that we talk about, you know, or just answer some questions, or just have a little bit of a roundtable, and then come back in January. I think we're gonna something meeting, come back in January with some ideas of, or maybe prioritization of each one of us that we can combine, put into a matrix or something that we feel is a little bit more important. But ultimately, like stated in the memorandum, is to have a joint session between city council and the planning commission, with showing the city council ideas, implementation, what you would like to do, and have them provide as much input. And they've gone over the same documents that we have, and as a group, give us some direction on what we need to do. Not setting any timetables, but I think if we able to develop maybe a pure just path on what to address first. What's more important right now? Housing, because a lot of our commercials on Main Street's going to be torn up for a while. May not get the attention that housing does, or the housing crisis. We're looking at increasing, changing zoning districts. Talk about maybe just fixing some low-hanging fruit, maybe something like reevaluating office residential. How necessary is that? Changing that just to regular residential, and then focusing on maybe a commercial mixed-use district that allows for what OR does, but where a mixed use probably well developed, which is probably more in the downtown, not in some of these, more established neighborhoods. So,
I guess I want to start, it's for me, a question. You got the map over there. Can we start by just saying, let's change the map? Or do we need to talk about the policies about how that contributes to the map? And I don't know that.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I have a very specific plan of how we could move forward,
Okay,
wish list, perhaps. What I'd love to see is, we've got our recently adopted chapters. I would love to create a document starting out with those. And then look at all these various reports that have been done, the housing needs analysis, the economic, the downtown revitalization plan, and there was another downtown plan or something. Every single one of those documents has ideas and very specific recommendations of things that could be done. I would like to go through those if I had all the time in the world, I'd do it myself, but I think it would be valuable for everybody here and the city council if we went through those documents and pulled out all the recommendations that have been made to the city and collated them into a single document, so that we could look at the plans that we came up with, all these recommendations, because at the time when we were creating the chapters of the comprehensive plan, there were a lot of things in those that were recommendations that we were like, yeah, that's something we really want to do, but that's not a comprehensive plan type wording or approach. But I want to bring those things back forward and put them right in front of us so that we can look at that laundry list of recommendations of all of the housing and economic and transportation, whatever recommendations they were, so that we can kind of get all that in mind. And then I would love to sit down with the city council where we have kind of a training session where we say, this is the map now, these are the different zones, these are the differences between the zones. These are all the things that have been criticized in the plans. And these are some of the things they recommend. These are the things that you have in the comprehensive plan, and then kind of put it to primarily the city council to say, where do we start? We can provide too, but I feel like I'd like, if there's some really strong directions at the council, how much sense does it make for us to go this way, just to send it to council and then go that way? So I think a little common work will make the process more efficient.
Are you talking about like the housing strategies? And as far as I know, we just have, other than the strategies that were given us for housing, I don't know how many other strategies we were given.
There was a lot of recommendations.
Those documents are this thick, and there's probably 2 pages of recommendations, but they're like sprinkled throughout. So it's a real pain to look at those documents.
Well, we had some
pull out.
specifically from Eco Northwest.
Yes,
Yeah.
And we took those out because they were causing, there was too much reflection on these recommendations instead of getting through the actual
Exactly.
plan and how it is.
So you're saying those recommendations are not in the housing needs analysis?
No, we took them out.
those are those blue shaded things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but we
you might
didn't
still
take
have
all
a
of
copy of it, but the final version did not have the recommendations. We sent it forward without them.
It still has some recommendations.
Does it?
doesn't it?
but they're not adopted.
No,
Yeah,
they weren't adopted.
Right, they're not adopted.
But we were using those as suggestions basically to bridge into the policy.
I mean, if I get my whole wish list, I would love to have recommendations. I know there's some recommendations in there. They're more generic. And then there's the specific ones. I remember we took out some of the specific ones. I'd love to see those collated too, just to say, okay, these are all the things these professionals said, and we can always take them or leave them, but I would just like all that information collated for me, so I don't have to sit down and read those reports for 4 or 8 hours to pull out all the nuggets, right? So I don't want to get rid of that work, and I want to get that work back in our minds as we start doing things.
Well, in doing that, I guess, would you need that to change the map? I guess that was my
Well,
question.
there were a lot of map change recommendations, like in the downtown plan, there's some recommendations about that office residential and where to change it to commercial, where to change it to residential.
Just residential.
And there was like maps and said, this is the boundary we propose. I think we
Well,
should all
like
look at
that, yes, you say that, I recall that, but I mean, like, for the housing stuff, I guess I don't seem to think that there was in that sense. I guess I'm thinking about the housing because of the conversation
Well,
tonight.
I think in a broad brush, it said, we have enough of this, we have enough of that, maybe you should have some more of this.
Well,
I mean,
yes,
I'd
that,
like to see those summary results kind of all in one place without all the data, because all those things are buried in an inch of data.
So because of the streetscapes, even though I know it's gonna take a couple of years, but would it make sense to look at the commercial zones? Because of what's going on downtown, if there's gonna be any changes, they're changed before it's done. It's like, okay, we're making some major changes to Main Street or to Applegate Street. Would it make sense to look at the commercial?
Well, to me, the big question is that zone between commercial and residential. I think you have to look at both to have everything in mind to figure out where the boundary should be. Or what that
So we're
boundary
saying
should
that
look
everything
like.
is a priority.
I'm saying you have to look at the whole map before you decide where to zone in first. I
Right.
mean, we're still gonna start somewhere, but I'd like to start by looking at the whole map, getting all the things that have been done and collated in a tight space, so it's something we could read in an hour.
Well, and then like I was saying, you hit the low hanging fruit. There's
Yeah.
Little things we can hit right away, let's knock that
Yeah,
out.
to me, there's some super obvious things. There's some of our office residential zone that is just flat, almost suburban residential area. And
Well, Oak Springs, apartments, that a couple of years ago, that's OR.
Right.
It's gonna be R3, it's gonna be basically a multifamily, it's gonna extend that, a lot of the
that's
stuff.
just a
on-
recognition of what's already happened.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of the stuff on the north side of College, which is still OR. We have at least 3 people that would like to partition their property to create another single family lot. But they can't with it being OR.
Right.
So we've talked about everything from the north, maybe just to the north side of College. Let's just extend those residential districts down.
Right.
Let's take a different, longer look at the southern part that actually abuts the commercial and see where we either keep that, convert it to R2, C1, C2,
Yeah.
maybe a mixed use overlay.
My feeling living in,
Oak Springs was an OR, which clearly it's R3. I mean, it should be R3. If Oak Springs was approved, you put in an OR, why can't somebody be able to subdivide and if it's a variance or if it's a condition of
they
approval?
can if they pay $1,000 and submit an application and come before us.
Which is what Oak Springs did?
I don't know, I wasn't here when Oak Springs.
Okay.
was.
Oak Springs was, I believe, a conditional use permit on an office residential to allow for multifamily dwelling. If I
So-
remember right. It's an allowed conditional use
Within
in
an
the
OR.
office residential zone.
So somebody
That
just-
Building a single family dwelling is not allowed on the office residential zone.
Yeah,
Oh,
It's a very
interesting.
odd
Kind of a
zone.
very odd zone.
And so, I mean, I live in the OR zone and it's weird. I mean, it just
How does it feel?
feels weird.
Feels weird, man.
Because if we moved out of the house and didn't live in it for 6 months, we wouldn't be able to move back in.
Wow.
Because that would be vacating it as a residence. So like the property that became an Airbnb on Main Street.
Yeah.
It was a residence,
Yeah.
but once those people moved out and it became a daycare for a period of time, it could never be a residence again because it's in the office residential zone.
What?
yeah, or if somebody opened up an office in your place, it couldn't go back to being a house.
Right,
Why?
right.
That's-
The office residential zone was one of those zones that was applied back in the 1980s when they created zoning. And it was applied onto neighborhoods that already existed. This wasn't like anything was built there under
Right.
the office residential zone. The office residential was added later.
And it allowed that residential area to transition to office space was the idea.
I too live in an office residential zone on Green Street behind Timber Supply, and it is all single family or duplexes, none of which.
On college, it was supposed to be, there's a couple, it was supposed to be.
Yeah, it was
If
supposed to
the
be a
couple had
complex.
gone in, it would be different.
Right.
But it's still a weird zone.
It's a weird zone.
Yeah. So that goes exactly to my point. I think the way we have to start this process is a little bit of education of collectively the planning commission and the city council about everything that's on the books now
Right.
before we start monkeying. You gotta know what you don't like before you figure out how to change it. We can't change the map without knowing what our new rules are gonna be. So you kind of have to work it together like a puzzle. Like, and then once you lay out the pieces of the puzzle, you start somewhere, but you gotta start seeing what your pieces are, right?
So, yeah, I don't really want to go through the H&A myself either. I agree with you there. I do want to
Get an
focus.
intern?
Well, yeah.
I mean-
We'll definitely pull out all the recommendations that Eco Northwest put forward, which are a couple of pages of good ones.
Yes.
I'll start looking at it.
And compare it to what the policies were, and see if, you know, if there's anything that I think that I can remember, or anybody can remember. We can even send it out email wise. We'll have it in a month. And if there's anything that's in there missing that you can say,
Right.
yeah, I think there's something.
It's
I
not just
remember."
that, we have 4 solid plans, maybe even 5, with recommendations. That have been.
Well, we have the
that have been in the
EOA,
last 3 years.
H&A, and we have the Main Street plan. Those are the 3 documents that I.
There's also a downtown
I
revitalization.
think it was
plan
the
that's done.
downtown revitalization one that I thought had the most comprehensive,
Yeah.
like, I really liked all the stuff in there. They had a lot of, they seemed the most wide ranging, like.
Is that the one that came through the brownfield grant money? Is that the-
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Sol.
Oh, yeah, maybe I misheard this, but it almost sounded like Van volunteered to do some legwork here for us.
Yeah, I
And
did.
like, if he was willing to put together these documents, he could send it around, you could throw in anything that's missing, no intern required. And we got someone who's actually on the planning commission.
I don't have anything to do. I'm retired.
Is that how that works?
I mean, I will do it. It just depends. I mean, December slows down.
Come on.
Yeah, you don't want to do this, Van just volunteered to do
Yeah.
this. Gift horse.
Got the final public hearing for UGB in Adair Village on December 6th. So that's just.
Mm. That's right, that's right there, aren't they?
Yeah, they could have a decision on December 6th to expand their city 55 acres.
So are there any other thoughts and ideas about how we approach this? And I'm disappointed we haven't started already. But I think I'd really love to start with some joint planning commission, city council education session.
Well, I think this body comes back in January and we define it a little bit more. Think about it. Well, because, I talked to Chris before this meeting, in city council, I think you're gonna have a really packed agenda for January, unless there's an ability to have them come in at a separate night, you know.
Well, I think we could do just a meeting of just looking at the code as the zoning designations as they exist today and talking through how it sits on the map. And that could consume a meeting just to get an understanding of
be
what's
too
there
long.
today.
It would be a short meeting.
No, but it could be a long meeting. I mean,
I think
but
you're
it
right
could be
there.
relatively short. You could be short, you could make it short. All I'm saying is that
It's just to
topic right
educate
there.
everyone and have us all looking and thinking.
I think that
about it.
sounds like a fine place to start. I think the reason there's a planning commission is that we don't have to have the city council involved in every single one of these things. So we can probably just kick it off and
And frankly, the city council is gonna be changing.
they're gonna be changing
At
it
some
when they're done, when we're done with it.
And I'm not gonna be able to be at the December meeting. Is everyone else?
When is
able
the
to be-
December meeting?
The 19th is when it says on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Well, I thought Pat said we weren't having one.
Well, I don't have anything for, I mean, other than we could have this discussion. We don't have any public hearings, we don't have any type threes, nothing's coming, nothing to come in.
So I'd have to have this done by the 19th.
No,
Or
no,
the
in January,
15th.
you have to have it done by
Yeah, you're
January.
retired, you can have it done by.
Can I have
Friday.
a clarification though, Ruth? If you, on the website, and if you click on, projects and you look under 2040 comprehensive plan, it has a list of things that have been adopted. And it has some like the housing needs analysis has been adopted. But then there's housing strategies.
At this point.
But then there's some strategies, which is a pretty good sized piece of, is a pretty good sized document, if I remember correctly. And I mean, it's quite a few pages, but it's there for all of us to look at regarding housing and some of the recommendations that Echo Northwest gave us. Is that
The
right?
reports and documents, there's the economic opportunity analysis, the housing needs analysis, the Main Street plan, the city council statement regarding the reports, the housing strategy report, and the economic development strategy.
Those
report.
two
are
strategy
all on the website under the city projects comprehensive plan. project.
Right. I mean, so we have access, we all have access to
Yeah.
look at those and see what we like. If we
That,
could.
I'm sure those are those that are in blue.
Yes, they are.
Ruth, was there something else you
Can
want to
I
say?
quickly make, for the record, Commissioner Green left the meeting at 8 o'clock, and she requested that I note that she voted no on the decision.
Oh,
So
okay.
I've made that notation. When you read the minutes, it will say that she voted no and that she left at 8 o'clock.
Thank you.
But Gary,
Can
Yeah,
I have
Garrett,
one other comment
well-
before you get started? Matt?
oh,
As far
good.
as meetings in January and February, those follow on holidays. So you might note that those meetings will be on the Tuesday after the holiday. There's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so it will be on January 17th, Tuesday, and on February 19th. Also Tuesday. Just as long as you're talking about the meetings.
Yes.
And those are,
If I understood right, you were saying that you thought there were other recommendations besides those in blue or in that.
I believe there are recommendations that exist within the documents that were accepted as as appendices to the.
yeah,
But we're not in that blue group.
no, you're
as I
talking about the same thing.
No, I think there's in the body of the report that was accepted, there's some recommendations just in the body of the text.
Well, I'll look at.
Yeah, I was saying, he still wants you to read it, man.
Policies and actions.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. that-
If I read it, and they're all the same. I'll be looking for it.
I look forward to your report. So can I back it up? Is there anybody that knows they're not gonna be here? Is.
Oh, we are gonna meet the 19th.
Well, it says on this paper, on the front sheet of our agenda today, where our next meeting is the 19th. I
I
will not
always
be.
put that date. That doesn't necessarily mean.
Right, I'm just kind of taking a poll to see if there's a reason. Are you available to?
I do have a trip coming up in December, but I don't know the exact dates yet, so I can't commit to being there. I don't currently have anything else on my calendar.
Haley indicated that she would be back in January. but she won't.
So the odds of a forum on the 19th are nothing.
Or if he, I'd be okay if we didn't.
I know.
I vote to cancel.
Good man.
I'm all right with that. Well, if we don't even have nothing, then the only thing we'd talk about was this, and then, like, that's why we didn't meet last time. Because we were
Yeah.
gonna talk about
Because
this.
we were gonna, I feel it's really important that everybody be there
Okay, let's not.
to, well, not everybody, I mean, you can't always postpone. when
Oh, yeah, if
one
you're
person's
not gonna be.
asked. Well, I mean, Joseph. can
You and
certainly-
Joseph.
Joseph May, he wasn't sure.
Yeah. So we're both on, you know, arm wrestle for sure.
I was gonna say, we can't lose both of our fearless leaders.
You get by with this.
Well, but if 2, 3, Well, Gianna was, or not Gianna, but
Haley will.
Haley would be here.
So-
Haley there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The voice.
The disembodied and the jar.
I mean, that would be three if,
Yeah.
what's your name? Joseph wouldn't be here.
It
either.
is very good for you to make this decision before the email, or before the
Yeah.
monthly newsletter goes out. though,
I'd
because
suggest we just
That way
go.
we can provide accurate information.
Question about the staff report, real
Yeah.
quick?
Well, can we close on that meeting? I mean, I'm hearing almost a consensus of canceling the December meeting. Does anybody have anything contrary to canceling the meeting?
I would be, I plan on, I'm gonna be here, so I can be here or not. I'm neutral.
Me too, but there is a possibility of a trip if I don't have something happening that day, so.
It's around Christmas.
All right, I'm hearing consensus, no planning
No, and
commission
Patrick
meeting
doesn't want to be here.
January, I mean, in December, and that we do plan on meeting in January with the discussion of the current zoning regulations and map, as well as a preliminary review of the documents that contain recommendations
The band produces.
or someone. Yeah. I may do my side piece just to check against yours.
I think that's.
Okay, and now you don't even trust it. Thanks a lot. You're gonna do all that work. You're gonna check it anyway.
I'm a bridge engineer. We don't do anything without checking.
Oh, well,
And
yeah,
we're all grateful for that.
People have a very poor attitude towards bridges that collapse.
yeah,
They do. There's.
yeah, I appreciate
Wait,
it.
what do you mean? Well, what kind of an attitude are people supposed to have about a bridge that collapses?
I'm just making a
Gravity.
mistake.
Gravity sucks.
Gravity always wins. So checking is my one of my.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
Quick question on the staff report.
Yes, please.
oh,
Just so I know, when I usually think of an ADU, I think of a little house next to somebody's big house. What is an interior accessory dwelling unit? Is that somebody changing a garage into a house?
That's where somebody has a downstairs space that they're converting into an additional apartment.
But the
Oh,
definition,
okay.
it has to have its own exterior
Can't be more
access,
than 600 square feet of the house.
Okay,
and it has a kitchen and a bathroom.
okay.
hey, if anybody knows anybody in Corvallis that has one of those, let me know.
Is that the mother-in-law suite? they call it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my daughter's looking for it.
But it has to be relative. Though. It really has to be like whether or not.
Not anymore.
You'll notice that single family residential permits have kind of.
Oh. I
All
do
the more
have a
reasons
question.
in January, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna go over the current zoning regulations.
I do have one other question. Number 2.
Mhm.
The east side of North Ninth. Where is that?
Application for a partition
Oh, yeah, thank you.
on the east side of North 9th Street. Okay, so that is, yeah, that's the property that was owned by the church. It's right at the end of, you know where Pippa Lane is? We've talked about Pippa Lane a few times here. So it dead ends into where, Life
That's not
Community Church. No,
that's like-
But there's a property right behind, right
There's a
behind it.
church on 9th?
No, a church owned a piece of property.
Owned a piece of property
Undeveloped.
that was there.
And
They sold it to,
Is it over the
Joyce
hill?
area. They
Is
sold
it over the hill?
No, it's right, almost right at the peak of the hill. There's a lady named Joyce Meyer. I don't know if any of you know her.
Are they gonna widen the road?
No. They bought the piece.
Oh, they're partitioning.
They want to partition it basically for their children. It's like a 2.5 acre piece, I believe, might be a little bit bigger than that. And they just wanted to carve out 2 pieces of property for their children.
Yeah.
And it's been on hold because they have to do to get that approved, they have to still submit a preliminary plat for how the rest of that site is going to be developed. We can't just carve out 2 pieces of 10,500 square feet parcels. We have to we have to see how that can be developed in the future and already start planning for roads and stuff. So I'm kind of waiting for them to get back to us, but
And it's also changing access that would be from 10th, 11th to access that would be from 9th. Is that? correct?
well, yeah, so there is some issues with they have cross-access agreement through the church property from Pippa Lane and 10th. But that can only be allowed to access two properties. So anything that's developed in the future is gonna have to come up 9th Street, which that property does not have any, does not touch 9th Street. So Joyce's property, she's gonna have to give cross access through her lot into that. Through her driveway, which she's gotta be an 80-foot driveway, so she can do it.
On 9th?
Off of 9th.
And is that something that's gonna be coming to the planning commission, or that's
No,
resolved?
it's still,
Oh, not for the petition.
Well, if it is, we shouldn't be talking about it.
For the
yeah,
petition.
and I think the preliminary still stays as a administrative review, it's on file. Per se.
This is just the petition.
When that one moves forward, obviously, you're all on the interested parties list. You all receive the emails with the copies of the notices, and at that time, once you receive that, it's all posted online with the application. So, you know, we're not at that stage yet. It's still in review, but you'll get that notice when it moves forward.
Well, I mean, this is just a petition. They're not developing it or nothing.
Not the other two, the two sites for their kids. And yeah, I've been sitting on it. She owes me, I mean, I'm waiting on her. I've been sitting on it for about a month.
Oh,
Waiting for additional.
well, I'm just worried about how, when that stuff develops about, you know, the road, the hill there and all that.
The county road.
I know, but we can still make them improve
Can we? We have a lot of improvements I'd like to make. I'll have to ask you about that. Any other topics for discussion before we adjourn?
Cut about 10 foot off the hill.
Meeting adjourned.